Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Transportation Channel podcast. My name is Artie Burko. I'm a producer with the channel. I'm also the founder of Burko Media. Our podcast series will provide you with valuable insights with industry experts from industry experts on a wide variety of transportation-related topics. I am joined today by my colleague and transportation industry expert, Dr. Richard Mudge. Our guest today is Kristen White, who is the acting administrator at the Federal Highway Administration at the U.S. Department of Transportation. She leads an organization that is dedicated to making transformational investments in improving safety, mobility, and innovation for the millions of us who use our nation's roads, bridges, and highways. Prior to her current role, Kristin served as the chief counsel, advising senior leadership and staff, by advancing FHWA programs and initiations as part of President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law. Before we get started, one piece of business, I just want to remind all of our viewers to go to www.thetransportationchannel.com to upload your own transportation-related videos and become part of our growing community. Now let's get started with our interview. Kristen, first of all, thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate you taking the time. And I was hoping that besides the brief interview the brief introduction that I just did for you, I was wondering if you could give us a little bit more of your background and how you came to have this interest in the transportation world.
Absolutely. Artie, Dick, colleagues, it's a pleasure to be here. And I really embrace what the Transportation Channel is doing in your mission to really amplify the stories of transportation. And that's kind of where the answer to your question belies us. So, and I'll start with some context settings. So when I was at the Minnesota Department of Transportation, we hired with the leadership of our Commissioner of Transportation, an artist in residence, and his name is Marcus Young. He's a wonderful behavioral artist out of St. Paul, Minnesota, and he would host these small workshops where we would center ourselves and then ask the question, what is your transportation story? And it was for the first time in my life, I and my colleagues took a moment to take a step back and ask, why are we in transportation? And what specifically is the first memory of transportation that we can really envision? And for me, that story is twofold. First, I grew up in rural America in Western South Dakota, very proud South Dakotan, wonderful values growing up in the Black Hills of South Dakota. But there wasn't a lot of transportation options. There wasn't public transportation. You had to, at the age of 14, learn how to drive. And as we know, and research shows, 14-year-olds are not the best drivers. They're actually very, very dangerous. And so 2 years into learning how to drive, one of my close friends and his brother and father were killed in a drunk driving crash when I was in high school. And then 2 years later, my dad's best friend, Bob Gallant, was also killed in a tractor semi-trailer collision. And those two instances, I didn't know it at the time, Artie, really impacted me. But these were just on the periphery of my life. My brain was still forming. I was still learning about the world. And so the second part of my transportation story is when I was awarded a Fulbright Fellowship. And despite never having traveled internationally, I moved from South Dakota to Tokyo, Japan, a city of 33 million people. It was my first big trip. And I remember right after college, hopping on that trip, on that big flight from SFO to Narita Airport. And as I'm looking at the coastline of California behind me, I start hyperventilating and having a panic attack. This tiny little small town girl going to one of the world's largest cities. And my transportation story, Artie, is this young couple, Akiko-san and her husband, sat next to me. And despite very broken English and my very broken Japanese, for 14 hours, we tried to relate, we tried to connect. And I had shared somehow in broken English that when I landed in Tokyo, I did not know what to do. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know how to get to my destination. And they taught me how to read my first subway map, in Japanese, mind you. They taught me how to exchange my money to get a chikatetsu token and subway card. And then they wayfinded me an hour out of my way from Tokyo Narita Airport to my destination so I could get there safely. And Artie, I think that's what we do in transportation. My upbringing, whether it was through law or public sector transportation or transportation technology and innovation, is all about connecting with people and trying to help them get to where they need to be safely.
You just touched on something I want to follow up on. Your law background, you came through law school and then you served as chief counsel at the administration. Tell me about that route to your current position. Is that unique, and what helped you get to that position?
Mm. Yeah, great question. I think many of us in Washington, D.C., where I currently live, would joke that it is not unique to be a lawyer in Washington, D.C. But when a mentor suggested that I move from private practice into public sector transportation law, I was a little flabbergasted. I had not, put these two stories that I just shared with you together, that would be my vocation, but I knew I wanted to serve the public good. And my mentor said, but think about transportation. It touches all facets of our lives. It helps you get to school. It helps you get your medical services. It helps you get social services. It connects you with family. And we need lawyers who understand all kinds of different aspects, whether that's environmental law, contractual law, innovation, how to solve challenges. And frankly, Artie, I think a lot of the lawyers in this field that are the most successful are fixers and problem solvers. And they answer the question, instead of saying no, they say, how do we get to yes? And that's how I've been successful in whatever challenge is in front of us. And I think that's true to the leadership of the Transportation Channel. We're trying to answer, how do we get to yes? And so that helped me get to a leadership position in my state DOT. That helped me get into AASHTO and develop some of the across the 50 states. I helped lead some committees and communities of practice at AASHTO. That helped drive towards this reinvention of connectivity, automation, and electrification in the field, which is the program I led in Minnesota, one of the first of its kind. And then that's what led me to become the Chief Operating Officer of ITS America. Just kind of being open to these conversations, trying to find ways through the risk to manage it, instead of recognizing that risk is always inherent to what we do, but it's the real leaders and innovators that leverage and harness that risk to find successful solutions in the transportation system.
I'd like to move on to a pretty big topic having to do with safety and innovation. I know that that's a very large priority for you. Can you give us a breakdown of maybe the one or two top safety issues that you are focusing on, that your department is focusing on, and how are those going to impact people in the real world?
Absolutely. As your listeners and many of you already know, 3.5 years ago, this administration committed to a Vision Zero, the first time that we joined the United Nations, global nations, to recognize that we will get to zero fatalities, even if it's an ambitious goal. It's a moonshot, just like JFK had a moonshot to get humans on the moon. And so with that Federal Highway Administration, with $1 in every $4 of our bipartisan infrastructure law flowing through federal highways, we have several key missions in front of us to advance safety. One is our safety culture. It is one thing to talk about Vision Zero. It is one thing to talk about safety and say it's important, but we really walk the walk at federal highways. So we embed every part of the core of our meetings, conversations, products, outcomes, policies, rules, NOFOs, which is a notice of funding opportunity. Every single one of these conversations starts and ends with safety. So we're really trying to reinforce what we call our safety culture, and working with the state departments of transportation to recognize that I need to be walking the walk just as much I talk the talk. And we're actually holding people accountable and calling them out when they're, for example, using a fleet vehicle and speeding when on the job. It does happen, we know, across public agencies. So that's part of the safety culture. And then the second thing is our investment. So we have launched what we call our proven safety countermeasures, which are 28 different types of investment, from more visible lighting to crosswalks to protected bike lanes, really to kind of help separate vehicle from user. And with that, we've actually just this year in January launched what we call our Safe Systems Design Hierarchy, because we know communities don't have a lot of funding. They don't have a lot of capacity or expertise. So even when they want to deploy these countermeasures, we call them, they need to have a process by which to start. So an hierarchy. And so just this year, we recognize that regardless of where you're starting, we introduced here's step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, et cetera, on how you make these investments in safety. And I will end, Artie, that long going into the future, this is going to be a topic of conversation, because despite the fact that we've seen 9 quarters of slow decline in our fatalities in America, we are still seeing too many people losing their lives. And every single one of our conversations should start and end with safety.
Regarding safety issues, in what ways are you and your department partnering with state and local governments and private industry to help bring change about and to get this message out?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you do mention private industry, and we're firm believers that public-private partnerships are absolutely key. I like to talk about P4s instead, public-private people partnerships, because the community needs to be a part of that conversation. And so there's several key areas we're working in. One is under our National Roadway Safety Strategy, which is a strategy that kind of outlines the hierarchy and how we're investing and thinking about these policies. We've actually allowed the opportunity for anyone in the country or globally to commit to be, quote unquote, an ally in action. And so we have hundreds of companies, from 3M to Amazon to public agencies to small transportation communities, who've signed on as a pledge to say we are committing our resources or our visibility or our work into advancing the Vision Zero approach. The second thing we've really been doing, Artie, is recognizing that it's not just states, it's a lot of different types of communities that need to be a part of the conversation. So with federal highways, 90% of our Formula Aid funding flows through state departments of transportation, but we're growing out that partnership to other types of public agencies, including the Governor's Highway Safety Administration. We're having conversations with them. Secondly, would include the National Association of City Transportation Officials, because we know a lot of these innovations and challenges happen right where it's home, in cities, in local communities. And then we're even moving beyond into other partnerships that we're exploring into the coming year. So to your point, it really does take a true public-private partnership where community is at the center.
What is the one, because I think this could be a question that could lead to an hour-long answer, but what is the one way that technology and innovation is making a difference in safety on the roads?
Well, those who know my background or know me at all, technology innovation is a very, very important passion of mine, and it's absolutely critical. Any conversation that talks about safety, transportation, efficiency, sustainability, equity, and resiliency is incomplete if we're not talking about technology and innovation, because the tech sector is disrupting the way we work, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's automating our systems, whether it's connecting and connected vehicle or connected technologies. The tech sector is really speeding up how we are thinking about these topics. And so one of the things we've been doing at Federal Highways and in my work before is really trying to understand human-centered design. It's really with that concept of human-centered design, you start with the first step, which is empathetic inquiry. And we skip that too often. And that's asking, Artie, what are the most pain points and problems in your daily life? What is really hard on you? For some people, it's I can't get home at night late after work because I'm a woman and I'm afraid for my safety using public transit. For others is I'm mobility challenged and it takes me 2.5 hours to schedule a service through the public agency for me to wait and get that public transportation to get to my doctor. Technology can help us, and it already is, whether it's connected vehicle technologies. We'll talk about and can dive into detail about our new VitaX deployment plan, where we have committed for the first time on paper a 10-year strategy to deploy that type of technology. Many of your stakeholders and listeners have talked about automation, and that is something that the federal government really needs to become a part of the conversation in leading that conversation. And of course, there's a lot of conversation on electric vehicles and even artificial intelligence. Just this summer, we launched the White House, our AI aspirations goals, where transportation is trying to understand how artificial intelligence and predictive analytics in that field can really help some of the most fundamental problems that we have not been able to solve today.
All right, so let's go down a little deeper into that, and you touched on it, but I want to know, why is it such an important milestone? We're talking about the National Deployment Plan for Vehicle to Everything Technologies. Tell us a little bit more about it, and why is it so significant?
Yeah, so Vehicle to Anything Technologies, or VitaX, they're technology that just saves lives. And for listeners that are brand new to this or unaware, it's a technology that's already commonplace in your mobile phone. And it's a technology that can allow, if you're in a vehicle, to detect objects. So if there's a pedestrian, if there's someone in a wheelchair, if there's another car around you that you cannot see, it can see it. And it will alert you and allow the car to safely stop or detect and avoid those situations. And similarly, there's all kinds of ways you can use connectivity, right? You can detect and avoid everything in and around the surface transportation sector. So that's really important. It saves lives. The two people that I lost in my life that I mentioned, Tate and Bob, who died when I was 14 and 16, connected vehicle technology would have saved them. So I think it's important to note that we need to be leveraging these technologies. And what's important is, for 2 decades, we've been researching this, deploying this. Automakers were begging, seemingly, the federal government to take a stance and say, are you going to support investment here or are you not? And for a long time, up until the past 3 years, there was not a lot of federal leadership. There were kind of stops and starts. Well, thankfully, over about 2.5 years ago, we had some leaders and some opportune times with federal leadership and federal agencies. And we said, you know what, the time is right now, or we're going to lose this opportunity. So Department of Transportation worked with the Department of Commerce, the Department of Defense, and together we realized we need a strategy. And we're going to commit to a 10-year vision, milestones, short, long-term strategies to deploy this technology to save lives. And this is really important, Artie, because now the automakers, the private sector, they have something to look at to recognize this is something we will be investing in as a country, and it eliminates the uncertainty in the market that would have prohibited them from investing in this technology. And I think any technology that is saving lives, we must be investing in.
How do you address people who might be wary of new technology? There is a large number, there's a significant, there always will be, no matter how far into the future we go, there's always going to be a portion of people who don't want their car talking to them, don't want their phone on when they're driving. How do you address that concern?
Yeah, Artie, I come at it with personal story. I come from a part of America that does not necessarily trust government or technology. And frankly, I was a bit of a Luddite before my mentor said, Kristen, if you don't become a part of this conversation and lead Minnesota's innovation program, someone else will, and someone else will be making the decisions. So my answer to your question, Artie, is twofold. One is we have to be skeptics. And as a lawyer, I think we're uniquely opportune to look at these risks because we're not going to dive in full force. We're going to say, what are the opportunities? What are the problems we're trying to solve? That's that human-centered design. Two is, how can, if at all, technology help solve those problems? And then three, what we do is we outline all the risks and we recognize you can mitigate many of these risks. So people are concerned, for example, about personally identifiable information being not protected. We have mechanisms in place. We have standards in place. We have policies in place to protect that. And if a nefarious actor chooses to obviate those policies, we also have repercussions. So it's important to note that we should always be open to these innovations. I completely, as someone who used to be a Luddite, I understand and empathize, but just closing our eyes and not being open to learning about them is not a healthy way to think about innovation. And change will always happen, right? What's the adage? The only constant in the world is change. So we should be adaptable, nimble, and flexible.
Got it. I'm going to ask my colleague, Dr. Dick Mudge, to come on board here. He's more of an expert on some of these topics, and I want to have him address specifically the bipartisan infrastructure law that went into place. So, Dick, do you want to go ahead and pose a question?
Yeah, well, as you know better than anyone else, Kristen, that was a huge bill. $350 billion, even in Washington, D.C., that's a lot of money. What did federal highways have to do differently to help the states handle that amount of money?
So the bipartisan infrastructure law absolutely is a generational investment, right? The largest investment we've seen since the advent of the infrastructure system and the interstate highway system under Eisenhower. And I think we can all recognize that the $550 billion that was allocated towards surface transportation, as I noted earlier, 1 out of every $4 is flowing through the Federal Highway Administration. So we have 19 new programs, several dozen more expanded programs, and of course, this is additional Formula A dollars that are flowing through our state departments of transportation. So we've been looking at a few key areas. One is really making sure that our public agencies have the capacity to deliver on the promise of the bipartisan infrastructure law and a huge resurface or reauthorization surface transportation bill that was passed 3 years ago. Just 2 weeks ago was the anniversary. So capacity building means a lot of different things. The Department of Transportation stood up what we call our Thriving Communities Institute, which if you're new to getting one of these grants or new to partnering in one of these Formula A programs, we have resources to help coach you, provide you information, teach you what we call as technical assistance and capacity building. So that's really first and foremost to really make sure that it's not just the states that are laboratories of this incredible innovation, but our public agencies that might be seeing this funding for the first time. But the second thing I think that is really important is we need to move beyond the statistics and the numbers into the story. So I'll start with this. We have now delivered at Federal Highway Administration $108 billion in the last 3 years under bipartisan infrastructure law investments. That is 200,000 miles of roads. That is over 10,000 bridges. That is over 4,000 separate projects. But those are just numbers. What is really important for us to know is that each one of those projects included our values at Federal Highways. It was a safety project. It was a project that helped address inequities. It was a project that helped create jobs and support and grow the local economy. It was a project that also looked at resiliency and sustainability of the system. And it was a project that really looked at innovation. These were the core values in the investments under bipartisan infrastructure law. And so I think about communities in the Seminole tribe in Florida that received a Protect grant and CFI grant, and they are looking at how to build more resilient tribal lands in America. I'm thinking about communities in Pennsylvania, which looked at innovation grants to take some of the data and innovation technologies like predictive analytics and are reducing emergency response times by 4 to 9 minutes. Now, when every minute counts to save a life, the bipartisan infrastructure law is literally saving lives and building more resilient, efficient communities. And that's the story we tell over the numbers.
I think it's interesting. It sounds like you're saying the states are not just doing more of the same, they're doing things that are very different.
It's a little bit of both. Absolutely, right? And I think that's something for us and you and your listeners to continue to advocate for in the next surface authorization bill, right? Is how we can continue this level of investment. One of the things we've done at Federal Highway Administration is staffed up to be able to prepare to deliver these investments while also recognizing that surface reauthorization lasts 5 years. And so if Congress chooses not to reauthorize that, we still want to make sure we have staff and capacity to support our state and local programs long into the future.
Are the states as excited about this as you are? Will they be calling their members of Congress saying, please give us more?
Yes. In fact, we just several weeks ago returned from the AASHTO annual meeting. AASHTO, those that are unaware, is the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials. So these are the leaders of the state departments of transportation, where 90% of this funding flows through. And they, in their what they call reauthorization principles, are vehemently advocating for this type of policy and investment moving forward.
Kristen, when it comes to the infrastructure law, if you had to pick the one thing that you want to put up there so that when people come to you and other people who are involved in transportation to say, what are you doing with my tax dollars? Related specifically to the infrastructure law, what's that one thing that you want to say, this is what we've done to make your life better?
Yeah, that's a great question, Artie. And I would always go back to what I start with, which is safety. The bipartisan infrastructure law created this really incredible program called Safe Streets for All, SS4A, we call it. We love our acronyms here in government.
Right.
And SS4A was a unique program in that it used a different part of the congressional authorization. And so under federal highways, we work under what's called Title 23 under congressional law, which has many, many requirements. In fact, over almost 2,000 requirements, everything from Buy America to procurement laws. Whereas Title II has fewer requirements, which allowed us to be more nimble. It allowed communities to get access to these funds without so many pages and pages of applications. So we've been able to deploy hundreds and hundreds of millions and billions of dollars under this program. And these are the projects that are already being built and have already been ribbon cut. These are projects like building bike lanes in Washington, D.C. These are projects that are like making lanes more visible in Colorado so that you can see different and vulnerable road users around your vehicle. These are small, both planning projects, because we need to help communities plan for these investments, but also major construction projects. But it's a reminder, Artie, that it's not always a $5 billion bridge project that makes transformational change. It can be as simple as a $200,000 bike lane project in a really important neighborhood that needs more safety measures.
I want to move on to an area that I think a lot of people maybe don't always think about when they think about transportation and government. I know that you recently returned from a trip to Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, and you saw some of the devastation that occurred there because of Hurricane Helene. We think of FEMA going in when there are these types of natural disasters. What role does your department play, and what was the result of your trip there?
Artie, I have to share that I'm still reeling from the conversations with community members and the scenes that I saw in North Carolina, Tennessee, South Carolina, and beyond. To answer your question, I have to start with the human story, with the impacts. And when the first time I was down there, I reported back to colleagues and family and friends that it was nearly apocalyptic. It is otherworldly, the devastation that the American South is seeing and will continue to see. Last week, they saw snow in the Appalachians in Western North Carolina, and people are still living in tents. So my heart and the hearts of all government officials are really, really going out to these community members. And In Yancey County, when we were looking to the leadership there and asking what is something government or anyone could do for you, Katie, who was a young EMT head and chief of Yancey County, said, transportation, ma'am, get us our roads and bridges back. Because that's how they're getting access. That's how they're getting chemotherapy to people who aren't able to access hospitals. It's how they're getting food and medical services and connecting people to their loved ones to know if they're safe. And so one important program that is oft underlooked is the Emergency Relief Program. Federal Highways for the Department of Transportation runs what we call the Emergency Relief Program, where Congress allocates $100 million each year so that the second an emergency happens, we stage people on the ground. We have people going in and inspecting and assessing infrastructure like roads and bridges to make sure they are safe. And if they are not, we immediately fund in what we call a down payment to these states and local agencies to start making investments. So for example, when an interstate goes down, so in Tennessee, Interstate 40 has literally crumbled from the side of the mountain into the river, and it is still not stable enough for people and the traveling public to move through. We are there literally with technical experts out on the field, but more importantly, we're helping fund and provide expertise and technical assistance long into the future. And right now, we have an $8 billion unmet need. And what that means is that so many natural disasters has happened so recently that we have $8 billion that we need to be paying out to Hawaii, Vermont, South Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, but we don't have the money. And so we need Congress to help support us so that every community in America, regardless of where they are and what happens to them, has the funding needed to recover and rebuild their community.
Did that trip give you any insight, or to what degree did that trip give you any insight into ways things could be done preemptively?
Absolutely. And Artie, the bipartisan infrastructure law actually alludes to many of these programs that are called resiliency programs. A lot of our infrastructure was built in a time and place where we were preparing for maybe 100-year floods. But those 100-year floods are happening every 3, 5, or sometimes annually, if not within a period of time within a year. And so this means building up better culverts, which are smaller bridges to withstand that kind of water flow. It's heightening bridges, it's expanding bridges, it's really ensuring the shores of our dams are intact. It's a lot of that type of infrastructure investment that's planning for the impacts of climate change, which are happening more and more frequently. And with a more resilient infrastructure, it can withstand many more of these types of events in the future.
I want to get to where we ask you to look ahead a little bit. But we do have a new administration that's taking over in January. And I'd love to get your insight into how you think that might impact what you and your department have accomplished and what you hope will be accomplished in the coming months and years.
Well, I will share with you that the one thing I have shared constantly since the election with my team is that our first priority is our people. We cannot do any of this work. We cannot save lives if we don't take care of the extraordinary public servants and civil servants in the federal agencies. And I have to brag, I've worked in a lot of different public agencies, private sector organizations, and the people of the Federal Highway Administration they are the best team, the most dedicated team with the most noble mission. They have worked nights, weekends, holidays for over 3.5 years to deliver the programs that we've been talking about. And so they deserve our support. And so one of the things we're talking about is how to ensure that we have public servants doing this good work long into the future, regardless of any sort of political goals or bipartisan or partisan aims. We need public servants at the Department of Transportation Federal Highway System to save lives and deliver on these programs. And the second thing is, we do see from this administration that's coming in, there is a focus on technology, innovation, and that's welcomed and wonderful. And third, I like to joke that we don't just cut ribbons here at the Department of Transportation, we also cut red tape. And I was just at the National Archives with my 10-year-old nephew, and we were reminded that red tape wasn't always a bad thing. In fact, in the Civil War, the adage came about when we would just put together old packets of information with red ribbon. And when it would get aged and aged and aged, you'd actually have to just cut it because the ribbon would get so hard. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to cut processes so we can deliver on the services we've been talking about for the last few minutes we've been together. And I hope that continues, but it has to continue with a real empathy for the extraordinary public servants at Federal Highways and beyond.
Regardless of the political situation, in the world of transportation and safety, and this is my last question for you, what's the one issue, what's the one accomplishment you'd love to see addressed in the coming year that could be a major, major impact for people.
I would love to see every public agency in this country have the funding and the commitment to invest in the proven safety countermeasures and the safe systems design hierarchy, because we must eliminate road fatalities. I would like to see that happen in a year, Artie. I have a feeling it will take a little bit longer, but if we were to sit down 10 years from now, I would love to be celebrating the fact that no more lives are lost on our nation's transportation system.
Well, Kristin, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to share your insights with us. I also want to thank my colleague, Dick Mudge, and remind everybody that at the Transportation Channel, if you want to participate with us, feel free to go to our website, www.thetransportationchannel.com, and share videos, share stories about the world of transportation. We thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you down the road. And thank you all for participating and for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.